If you know you have a profitable trading strategy, but you continue to mess things up, you continue to sabotage, you continue to over risk and overtrade and give back your profits back to the market, then this video was made specifically for you. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can stop self-sabotage for good and how you can start pulling $10,000 a month in payouts from your trading. Now, very early on in my trading journey, I was lucky enough to work with a very skilled trader who was also an exceptional performance coach and was also an individual who had gotten a lot of coaching from other professional performance coaches. And the first coaching call we had, I went on it and I told her that I'm struggling with self-sabotage. I'm at a certain level with my trading and I feel like there's a ceiling in my mind and I just can't push past that. And she said to me, I'm going to say something to you that's going to sound a little bit funny, but I'm going to explain it. And she said that there's no such thing as self-sabotage. She said, you are exactly where you are right now with the results you're getting because that's what you deserve. You are getting the exact results you're getting because of your programming, because of your belief system, and that's what you're manifesting. And that is absolutely not what I wanted to hear from her. I wanted her to give me a quick fix to my self-sabotage. But then she went in there and she gave me an exercise to help me uncover this so-called self-sabotage and understand it deeper. It's exactly what I'm going to share with you in this video. And on that coaching call, took her 30 minutes, but that coaching call helped me understand my so-called self-sabotaging behaviors on a deeper level, understand the root cause of them, understand why I was doing them. And from that day, I had more control over these behaviors and I could use them strategically if I wanted to or not. Now, as I started to study more on human psychology and the human brain, I studied self-sabotage and I studied human motives and what drives people to make certain decisions. And I came to the same conclusions on self-sabotage. So what I'm going to share with you in this video is going to be eye-opening. It's going to be informative. It's going to go against what other people tell you on the internet, but I'm certain about it. I've shared this with hundreds of my one-on-one clients and I've helped them break through their so-called self-sabotage, understand on a deeper level. And that's exactly what I'm going to help you do in this video. So before we get into it, if you have a specific trading psychology issue, make sure you let me know in the comments below. I want to offer you some insights. Now, no human being moves a muscle without a particular motive. And every decision you make at any point in time is based on what you think in that moment will give you the greater advantage over disadvantage. Even so-called destructive behaviors that you then look back on and you beat yourself up about, you're still getting more benefit than drawback in that moment. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing that behavior. And I know what I'm saying isn't what people want to hear, but the more and more you study the brain and understand human behavior and human motive, that's the truth. No human being ever moves a muscle without a particular motive. And our motor actions are as a direct result of our perception of what we perceive as greater advantage to disadvantage towards our value system at any point in time. You know, if you were to walk into a restaurant, even though you may not be consciously aware of it, you're going to quickly scan that restaurant and you're going to make a decision of where to sit based on the perception of benefit versus drawback. So let's imagine this is an obvious example, but it's not always this obvious. It's below the surface in the unconscious mind that we make these judgment calls. But let's say, for example, there was an obvious group of very scary people that looked really rough and really tough, and you're going to have an inclination away from those people. And then let's say, for example, there's a group of really attractive females for me or for someone else, something else, whatever you're into, but someone that matched your search image, you're more than likely, consciously or unconsciously, going to drift towards the people that match your search image and you perceive support your values. Who knows? Those very scary people could be the nicest people, but we make a judgment call based on certain information and based on what we think is going to give us the greater advantage over disadvantage in that moment. And even with our so-called self-sabotaging behaviors and destructive behaviors, we would not participate in those behaviors unless they gave us more benefit than drawback in that particular moment. Now, there's effectively a 4-stage process that every trader goes through when they have self-sabotaging behavior. Initially, there's some sort of a trigger. Maybe it's a trading loss. Then, say for example, that trading loss puts you into a certain state. You feel anxious, you feel like you're on the back foot, you feel like you're having to catch up. So being in that certain state makes you uncomfortable, it makes you anxious. The so-called destructive behavior, all it is a coping mechanism for that particular state you've been put in. And this is coming back to what I was explaining before. That so-called destructive behavior, you're making a decision to exhibit that behavior because it's helping you cope with a certain state that you don't like being in. Now, it was not long ago that I had a one-on-one coaching client come up to me, and this is the most common issue in my mentorship. This is what I help traders resolve on a deep subconscious level. But I had a trader come to one-on-one coaching with me, and he said that I keep doing this stupid mistake. I keep over risking on setups, and I keep taking trades outside of my plan. And he was really beating himself up over it. And I said, okay, let's go and have a look at why you're doing these behaviors, what's driving these behaviors. And he's like, because I'm stupid. And he was judging himself and he was labeling himself. I said, well, you're not stupid. You're a very successful individual. Let's go and have a look at what is driving you to make these particular actions in these specific moments. Because you're not always doing this. You're just doing it in these specific circumstances. So I got him to go back to these moments he was participating in these so-called destructive behaviors, the over-risking and taking trades outside of his trading plan. And I asked him, in that moment of making that decision, what's the benefit to you? What's in your mind the benefit you perceive you're going to get in that moment? He said, there was no benefit. I said, you wouldn't be doing the action if there wasn't benefit. If you didn't have motive, you wouldn't be moving a muscle. So what's the motive you have in that moment? I said, there isn't a benefit. There is no motive. So I started to help him with the answers, going back to my own trading experiences. And I said, okay, in that moment, were you in a state of anxiety? Were you feeling like you're in the back foot and you just come off a few losses and you felt like your funded account was below break even and you felt like you didn't want to be in that state? He said, yeah, that's exactly right. He said that he'd taken a few losses on his new funded account. He was sitting a little bit in the negative and he was in a state of anxiety, feeling like he was in the back foot, feeling like he had to make up for that. So those losses triggered him into a certain state, and that state, that anxiety, he didn't like that. He wanted to get away from that. And I said, so can you see that you're over risking? The benefit you get in that moment is that you perceive in that moment it's going to take you outside of that state, outside of being below break even. And he said, yeah, I can see that. And I said, can you see that you're making a decision to over risk in that moment because you perceive that's going to take you away from your state of anxiety? And so I can see that. I said, okay, we got one benefit. And then I also said, can you see that you're taking trades outside of your trading plan because the market isn't presenting an opportunity to you in that moment and you really want to get out of that state of anxiety now? So your brain perceives that that's the way it's going to get out of that. Obviously it's not, but that's just his perception in that moment. That's the benefit he thinks he's going to get in that moment. And he said, I can see that. I said, great. Can you see that your so-called destructive behaviors are a coping mechanism for that state of anxiety that you don't like being in that's been triggered because you've gone into the negative on your funded account? And he said, yes. So I helped him dissolve these triggers and I helped him manage this state with alternative strategies that don't require him to participate in the so-called destructive self-sabotaging behavior. And when we did that, guess what? He's no longer triggered by going into the negative of his funded account. He's no longer triggered by painful losses. And he has alternative ways to deal with anxieties in his life and in his trading. So he doesn't need to participate in the behavior that he was using that was helping him in that state. I hope that makes sense. This is why I'm trying to communicate that you have unconscious motives. You do not move a muscle without a motive. And think about it. You as a trader, you get put into this anxiety state. You're finding any way to get out of that. You're trying to avoid that pain. So these so-called self-sabotaging destructive behaviors, all they are is a coping mechanism for an unwanted state. Now, if you don't do what I just said and you keep beating yourself up for this so-called destructive behavior, now you're doing it because it's serving a purpose in that moment for you, but then you look back on it and then you compare your actions, the so-called self-sabotaging destructive behavior like over-risking or taking trades outside of your plan, and you're then comparing these to a fantasy of what you wished you had done, which is not traded in that moment or stuck to your trading plan, or use your normal risk, whatever it is. And then because you're comparing it to a fantasy of what you wished you had done, or you're comparing it to another trader who did the action that you think you should have done, or to your mentor, or whatever it is, you then beat yourself up in a state of guilt and shame. You beat yourself up for doing the very thing you were doing to help you cope with what you needed to cope with in that moment. It doesn't really make sense. The beating yourself up and the torturing yourself for doing an action because you're comparing yourself to a fantasy or to an external authority doesn't make any sense to me. I would much rather help traders understand why they're participating in certain behaviors and then find ways to deal with the triggers and deal with the state and then create alternative strategies and alternative actions to deal with that state as opposed to participating in that destructive behavior. I'd much rather help them understand why as opposed to just saying, oh yeah, you're a terrible trader or you're a terrible person for doing that particular action. That doesn't make any sense to me. Because what happens when you guilt and shame yourself or someone else, if you're looking at someone and And you're like, why on earth would you do that? Or if you're beating yourself up for over risking or taking trades outside of your trading plan, or really anything, whatever you beat yourself up over, you're going to repeat. And the reason you repeat it is because by definition, guilt or shame assumes you're aware, you're conscious of the drawbacks, you're unconscious of the benefits. There are benefits and hooks there that are keeping you repeating the behavior and coping with the state, but you're unaware of those benefits and you're just torturing yourself and beating yourself up because you're only aware of the drawbacks, but you're still going to repeat the behavior because you have an unconscious benefit to doing so. It's helping you deal with the state you don't want to be in. So you're going to continue to repeat the behavior anyway, but the more you beat yourself up for it, the more you're going to repeat it, but you're going to just continue to beat yourself up and judge yourself for it. So I'd much rather go in there and go to the moment you're doing the so-called destructive behavior and figure out what benefit you're getting in that moment from participating in that behavior. It's not difficult to do. You just need to hold yourself accountable and have a look in your mind at the time. What benefit do you perceive from doing this action? And you'll see it. It will be there. You don't need to make it up. You don't need to try and justify your action. You just need to look. You wouldn't be doing it if you weren't getting benefit in that moment. So you go back to that moment and ask, what are the benefits? And find 20 of them. And then you'll realize, shit, this is why I'm doing this behavior. Why was I beating myself up over it? It makes perfect sense. And when you get to that level of awareness of your actions, of why you're doing a particular behavior, and then you're aware of what benefit you're getting from it, you can then plan alternative strategies to get those same benefits without doing that strategy of the so-called destructive behavior. And then figure out better ways to deal with these triggers of taking losses. Like, for example, using my Bulletproof Your Trading Mindset Tool 2.0. It's going to help you address these. By the way, all the content I put out, my free Bulletproof Your Trading Mindset tool, the mentorship program that I have, the paid mentorship program I have, my one-on-one coaching, these are all the tools and the teachings in there are all designed to help you deal with this anyway. I've ingrained these into the processes and into the protocols. So if you use the Bulletproof Your Mindset tool, which is a completely free tool, by the way, link in the description, you then are less likely to be triggered in that moment, and you're less likely to put yourself into an emotional state and participate in destructive behaviors and then guilt and shame yourself and then repeat the behavior. You're more likely to just stop here. And then, or you'll reduce it by 90% or 80%. And then you find alternative ways to deal with the anxiety state as a trader, as opposed to trying to make that profit back. Find an alternative way to deal with that. For example, going for a run or lifting weights or doing a deep breathing meditation or something like that, or some sort of post-trading routine. I have a few of those in my content. I hope this makes sense. I'm just trying to give you an understanding of why you do certain behaviors and help you realize that you have more control over them than what you think. Most people say, there's something wrong with you, you're broken, something like that. It's craziness. You don't move a muscle without a motive. If you become aware of why you're doing a particular action, you'll realize exactly why you're doing it. But if you compare yourself to how you think you should have done it, or other people, your mentor, or your past self, or whatever, a fantasy or whatever, you're not going to be able to understand why you're doing it and figure out the reason you're doing that action. And you're just going to continue to repeat it. Until you figure out the unconscious motive, you'll continue to repeat it, you'll continue to beat yourself up, and you'll continue to just be stuck in a cycle, in a loop. As opposed to, you'll revolve as opposed to evolve as a trader. You just be stuck at break even. The traders who understand this, they implement it. I've seen it over and over with coaching clients, with students in the mentorship. They just go from one level to the next and they just keep scaling up and getting more funding, making more money, and they just keep building momentum. Hopefully this was insightful. If it was, make sure you like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with all my content. And I will see you all in the next video.